Premier Heating and Air is now offering all homeowners up to $2,000 instant rebate and up to $2,000 federal tax credit with the purchase of a qualifying HVAC system. Financing available for all homeowners, so call Premier Heating and Air today and get up to $2,000 instant rebate and up to $2,000 federal tax credit with qualifying HVAC system. Premier Heating and Air, a locally owned and operated company. Offer ends 11/30/23. Hello everyone, welcome into the studios again. Dr. Cliff Morris, welcome to you, sir. Thank you so much for coming in today. Last time we spoke, you were on the air with us about a year ago. We talked about Israel, and you explained a lot of those regions and got a lot of good feedback on that. Cliff, I say that you are not only a student, but obviously a teacher and professor of the Bible, but you love history, don't you?
Yeah, I sure do. It's fascinating. There's a lot to learn about how we live today by looking at the past and how we got to where we are today.
Yeah. I'd mentioned before, my wife and I were in Israel a year ago today. And the past week or so, and you think about how things are now and what could have happened. You see in the news, there was a pastor in Metro Atlanta that was stuck there with some family, and they were able to get out, and so there's a good story there. They were over visiting. You have a group that was planning to go first of the year.
We were going in April, and with Jerusalem tours, and really excited about that, and people were beginning to sign up, and then all of a sudden that's not going to happen. My second trip to Israel was with Jerusalem tours, and it was a clergy trip, and it was really an attempt to get pastors to go virtually free and experience it and come back and say it's okay to come, because they had gone through several years of great conflict. And so I went on that, and it was a small group of pastors from a lot of different denominations. And we had a great experience and came back. And the deal was, I think it was $1,000, which is real cheap to go to Israel. And then they said, and we'll give you that back if you bring a group within a year. And so that's what happened. And a group from First Baptist Dublin went about a year or so later. But something's going on now that's a little different from that. The depth of the conflict is at another level. The evil, just the weight of it all, the darkness of it all. And so I don't know. Be glad you went to Israel when you went. Because it's going to be a long time before tourism resumes.
How many times have you been?
I've been 4 times. And so I was looking forward, really excited about going back.
There's so much to take in.
Yeah. And for me, if you've been several times and you're a Bible teacher, it's kind of like raising kids or doing stuff with my grandkids. It's not new, but the real joy is taking somebody else that hadn't been there or hadn't seen that yet and helping them experience that for the first time. So I was really looking forward to that, and we'll see if that ever happens.
And I'm sure it's this way, I would think, with most people, but as soon as the trip is coming to an end or you leave, you say, we have to come back. And we want to bring this person and this person and share it.
You really could go many times and not exhaust it. The first time I went, I studied all I could ahead of time, reviewing what I'd learned before, and then you go and you see it, and then you come back and you read about what you saw. So the second and third trips really come to life. So anyhow, I hope I get to go back again someday.
And so knowing the Word as you do, knowing what God's Word says about that region, but looking at it today. Now you say it'll be a while. You say it seems that way because the war is, even though Israel is making fast advancements and very strategic and has the military capability to obviously win the war. A lot of people don't understand. You know, you have people protest, Palestinian people protesting everywhere. You have a lot of people who look at social media and the propaganda that comes out that Israel is this tyrant or this, people who are just killing off a nation. And then you have the other side who say, Israel is right. They're protecting themselves. They were drawn into war by what the Palestinians did. Of course, it's obvious that that's wrong. It should be, that Hamas, which is part of Palestinian or part of the Gaza Strip, has caused this war. But there's a lot of dynamics there.
Yeah.
And knowing what you know, kind of unveil that for me and for our viewers.
Yeah. Well, for me and probably everybody else, it's over our heads. It's a weighty subject, and it goes way, 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 way back. Abraham lived 4,000 years ago, approximately, rounding off, and all this has roots going back that far. The book of Ephesians, Paul talks about a number of topics. It's one of the great books of the Bible, relatively short, but he gets down to the end, and he's trying to draw it all together. He's talked about salvation itself, and God's sovereignty and family life and all these issues, and he's coming down to the end, and he says, but we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities of the air. And it's like, wow, Paul, what are you trying to tell us there? And he's really saying, we see at this level, and there are things going on at another level that we don't grasp. We don't see the magnitude of that. When you're watching cable news at night or whatever your favorite channel is, or picking it up on TV 35 or wherever you're picking up news lines, you see Israel with maybe 6 million people. I mean, it's like half the size of Georgia. It's not a big country. Right. And then you've got the Gaza Strip is 25 miles long and about 5 miles wide, a little wider in some places, but and a couple of million people down there. There's a lot of people packed into that little strip of land. But 6 million, 2 million, and you're talking 7 billion people in the world. Why this conflict, and why is the whole world watching it? And why are huge armies standing on the edge of that, ready to engage if necessary? What's the deal? And then they start talking, and you say, well, you got Gaza here, and just up the road are these Israelite cities. But off to the west in the Mediterranean, you got the U.S. Navy with the greatest warships in the world, aircraft carriers, and the supporting ships with all their missiles, and all that's sitting out there. And then they keep talking about Iran and its role, and how they're the puppet master, and they're just working through Hamas and things going on in Lebanon and Syria and all this, and that they're really behind that. So you got two little groups of people here, and then these two world forces that are kind of behind that. Hopefully it doesn't grow into a greater involvement of both of them, but they're there. But the Apostle Paul would say, yeah, that's a good observation, but you need to also understand that there's something even bigger than that that's behind all this, the spiritual dimension of it. There was a movie, The Kingdom of Heaven. I don't know if you ever saw that. It came out maybe 20 years ago, I don't remember. And it was criticized by some about how accurate it was historically. It was really, in some ways, it was pretty on. It was about the Crusader age and the Crusaders trying to defend Jerusalem. And Jerusalem in the movie and in the reality of life is sort of a symbol. It's a city, you've been there. It's an amazing place to visit. There's so much, it's just like a sponge that's 100% wet with biblical history. Everywhere you turn, you're bumping into Old Testament that and New Testament over here, and it's an amazing place. But the Kingdom of Heaven movie is built on, at that time, Crusader armies and the King of Jerusalem are there in the city trying to defend it, and the Arab armies are Saracens coming from the east, Saladin, and so the movie plays out along those lines. It's a gory movie, and they fight it out for 2 hours, and finally the end, to spoil the movie for anybody that hadn't seen it, sometimes you can get it on YouTube. It's hard to get up, and there's an Arab version that's got their commentary woven into it. But you finally get to the end of the movie, and the Christian crusader leader, whose name escapes me, he's sort of a fictionalized character woven into the true story, but he's surrendering the city of Jerusalem to Saladin, who was a historical figure that was involved in those events. And so they meet out on the east side of Jerusalem in this big plain. It doesn't really look like what you would see if you were looking out of Jerusalem today, but it's for the movie, this big open plain, and they're down there talking, and they come to an agreement. Saladin will back off, and the Christian leader will lead his crusading army, and the Christian residents of Jerusalem lead them out north and down to the Mediterranean and evacuate the city. If they'll just stop killing people, we'll do that, and we'll evacuate the city, and it'll be yours, and there'll be peace for now. That predates the Third Crusade, which was Richard the Lionheart and that group that went. That's another whole story. But in the movie, they're about to, and this is all, of course, Hollywood or fictionalized script, but they're about to leave, and the crusader turns to Saladin, and again, both men have lost thousands of people in this horrible battle over this one place. Yeah. And so the crusader says, by the way, what is Jerusalem worth? And Saladin, he answers twice. And the first time, he kind of grins, and they both are kind of laughing. He says, nothing. It's just a place. And then he walks away a little bit, and he turns back a second time with a serious face, and he says, everything. It's like, whoa. It's like this, what we've done here in this battle is off the charts in significance. It means everything, because whoever controls this has more than a little bit of land. It's not you've been there. It's a rocky place. It's not nothing special about the topography or the agricultural potential. You have to get up to the Jezreel Valley to see the great farms and that kind of thing. So Jerusalem's just a rocky city on a hill, but it's a powerful symbol of what rules here, what's going to dominate. So I think even when you get into 21st century current politics, that dimension is still there. In the world of theology, you talk about the promised plan of God. Walter Kaiser, one of my old teachers in Chicago, wrote a great book called The Promised Plan of God. And it goes all the way back to the beginning of the Bible and shows how all of it from the beginning was aiming to the New Testament and to the coming of Christ. And since Christ, everything looks back to Christ. It's all built around Him. He is the promise, and there's a plan about His coming. It all centers in that. And you read the Old Testament, and all the wars, war after war and clash, and all the turf and moving around. Yeah. And they're all about who will control Jerusalem and then the region around Jerusalem. And will this plan happen? And the forces of darkness Paul's writing about in Ephesians are saying, this is not going to happen. We're going to stop this. This will not occur. And God is saying, oh yes, it will. This is my plan, and I'm the creator and the sovereign Lord of the universe. And so a lot of that's going on, and that's way over our heads. That's about as far as I can go. I'm already drowning over my head with just those thoughts. Yeah. But that's pumped into the Gaza Strip today with what's going on right now, where you see the buildings collapsing and the people moving to the south and all that going on. So it's pretty crazy. Yeah. I've been around a while, and I watched the history of that, and I can remember being in high school. Yeah. I'll date myself. I was in high school when the '67 war was going on. I think I was in the 9th or 10th grade. And I began to learn about it for the first time. I had no awareness of that. I'd heard about Jews at church maybe a little bit, but didn't understand that. And suddenly you're beginning to hear about Israel fighting countries on all sides. And so I love geography. I was taught by my grandfather. I brought his atlas that was from the mid-50s. And so that got handed down to me. And if you look at it, and I'll let you put it up on camera later maybe. If you look at it, and you go to the Middle East and to the regions that are in the news today, you see these countries that are involved. I don't know if you can see that at all, but orange or pumpkin color is Israel. The purple is Egypt. The pink red is Jordan. And this odd little piece here is the West Bank. But this is from the 50s. And the Gaza Strip is purple, which is the color of Egypt.
Yes. And
it's considered Egyptian. And the West Bank is pink and adjoins Jordan, and it's considered Jordan. That's in the 1950s. And that's the way everybody understood it until you came down into the 1960s, had yet another war in the series of wars between Israel and the surrounding armies. And then those things began to be treated in a different way. Israel won all the wars, despite what Arab kids are taught today in Egypt. I've been to Egypt in the War Museum there, and the depictions of those wars show Israeli jets crashing, murals on the wall, and the Arabs are prevailing in all matters related to the wars there, which we, of course, know that's not how it played out. Yeah. But at some point, with Israel conquering all of that, the Gaza Strip becomes part of Israel or kind of under their control. The West Bank, that was part of Jordan, now becomes its own thing and under Israelite control because they have everything all the way over to the Jordan River after those wars. So that changes everything. And you've got two groups of people in the south at Gaza that were once under Egyptian rule, but not really Egyptians. Now they're under Israeli rule, but not really Israelites, certainly not Israelites. And the people in the West Bank were Jordanians, but now they're not Jordanians. They're kind of their own thing. So they're really in search of an identity, and they're claiming their identity means they own all of it. So they see it's theirs. The last trip we took to Israel with a group from First Baptist Dublin, we went up on Temple Mount. I don't know if you went up there. It's exciting to go up there. You have to be careful. You can't take a Bible up there. Israel controls the city, but they allow the Palestinians to control Temple Mount unless they need to step in. And so they kind of back off just to try to maintain peace. So our Israeli guide, an retired Israeli major, airborne major, Itai was our guide, and he took us up there, walked us up to where the Dome of the Rock, which is a serious Muslim site, is, and we were about 100 feet south of that, and our group is just kind of circled around Itai, and he starts to talk, and he's pointing up at the Dome of the Rock, and he said, now this is up here where that's where the temple sat back in the days of Jesus, and before, back in the Old Testament times. And walking up behind Itai, Itai was not a real big guy. He was not afraid of anybody with his background, but he was not an intimidating sized guy. This larger guy that's a Palestinian walked up behind him, and he looked at us. He looked over Itai and just interrupted what he was saying, and he said, there was never a temple here. And Itai looked at him, looked at us, and then he just picked up where he was. Now this is the site where the temple was. The guy says, no, there was never a temple here. And that went through 3 or 4 cycles. And we're sitting there thinking, man, wow, we didn't pay for this. This is kind of like a bonus feature here. Yeah. We're seeing the feelings of these two groups of people that run very, very, very deep. So Itai, our guide, just walked off and left us. I said, hey, Itai, so I was getting ready to leave and lead our group. It's like, we'll just go over here and look at the Eastern Gate and see you guys, be nice to the Palestinians and walk off and thank them for their input or whatever, and we'd call it done. But several other Palestinians came up behind that guy, and kind of like they were there like, we're here to let you know this is our place. And so they were not intimidating toward us, but they wanted us to know we were wrong and they were right, and they were going to set us straight. And now our guide's gone, and then he returns with Israeli police. It's like, I'm going to get the real help.
Right.
And so it kind of got ugly, and I said, let's go to the Eastern Gate. And we just started walking over there and kind of left it behind. But it was a great, we should have paid extra for that, because it was a great living, current picture of the deep-rooted hate between two groups of people. Their ancestors go back 4,000 years in that region. It's about Jerusalem, which means nothing. It's just a place, but it means, and the movie says it means everything. And especially Temple Mount means everything. And 3 different religions say it means everything, and they all mean something different by that. So it's an incredibly fascinating place. Did you go down to Bethlehem on your trip?
Yes.
Okay, so you know when you go down there, maybe people watching have never been there, probably most have not. You ride your Israeli bus down to the wall, which looks like the old Berlin Wall for old timers. And we usually would get off of our Israeli bus and go through the pass and get on a Palestinian bus owned by Palestinian Christians. And there's a Christian minority in the West Bank, very few in Gaza, but in the West Bank that used to be part of Jordan, there are Christians. Maybe most of them would be Syrian Orthodox Christians, which on the bottom line of their theology, they're basically evangelical Christians. They love the Lord, Christian music, and they're on that side of the wall, and they will take Christian tourists from America on their bus to show them around and take them down to Bethlehem, to the Church of the Nativity. And the bus is owned, or was owned in those days, by the Nissan brothers, like Nisson. They are not Japanese, it sounds Japanese, but they are Syrian Orthodox Christians, Palestinian Christians. And so Mr. Nissan will show you around and then take you back to his olive wood shop where everybody's supposed to buy olive wood souvenirs to take home.
Yes.
And that's kind of how it works. And then you come back up to the wall on Mr. Nissan's bus and wait till your bus is at the head of the line, and then you transfer through the gate into your Jewish bus, and your Jewish guide is waiting for you there to take you back into the Jewish world of Israel. And those things, they tend to put if it's a church group, they tend to put the pastor on the front seat, just so the guide and the pastor can talk about what you're going to do. And so I was sitting on the front line and looking at that wall, getting ready to depart and go through it. And we're about 3 or 4 vehicles back, and the line's not moving. And Mr. Nissan's standing right in front of me. And the wall on the Israel side is smooth, clean, gray concrete. If you saw it, remember seeing that. Looks like something that got built yesterday in America along a highway. And on the other side, there's graffiti everywhere. It's I hate Israel graffiti, I hate America. It's like all kind of horrible things. And so I asked Mr. Nissan, what do you think about that? What do you think about that wall? And he couldn't answer. He kind of bowed his head, and you could see tears welling up in his eyes, and he just shook his head. His world was changing. I don't know if his shop is still down there in Bethlehem. He was in the process of trying to have a shop in Jerusalem, anticipating the day when it would not be, Christians would no longer go to Bethlehem. Well, I don't know if they were going there 7 weeks ago, but probably when tourism, if it ever returns to Israel, they won't go through the wall and down to Bethlehem anymore. I may be wrong. I'd like to think I'm wrong, because it's an exciting thing to go there. But that's that wall that's separating, and down in Gaza, there's that rim and the wall goes all the way around. The first time I went to Israel, our group went with a guy I had met in school at Chicago named Bob Livingston, who had a brother named David Livingston. That's a cool name, but he was an archaeologist, and he was working on the biblical city of Ai from the book of Joshua, digging in the rocks and stuff. So Bob, his brother, wanted to take us up to see where his brother had been digging, and excavating this biblical site. And it's about 10 miles north of Jerusalem. So we rode up there through some Palestinian areas, and we were really in the West Bank when we got there. So it was non-Israelite. We stopped in the West Bank at a little colony community of maybe a couple of hundred people who were Israelites that were trying to colonize that in the West Bank, which is very controversial.
Yes.
And so we went up there and sat down while Bob showed us, looking 100 yards down into AI, what his brother had done. A little Israelite girl came out with a tray and a pitcher of lemonade and some cups. Never seen us before, and started serving all these Americans lemonade. So that was really neat. It's like in this crazy world around us, here's this little symbol of peace and good and decency and happiness. And but from that site, you could look south a couple of miles up on high ground, and this big steel network of things that are there. And that was going to be, in the 1960s, a palace for the king of Jordan, because that was part of Jordan in that time frame. Just like my grandfather's map shows, that was Jordan. And so the king of Jordan, who had several palaces, was going to put another one right up there near Jerusalem, where he could look out his windows and see historic Jerusalem and look to the other direction, see the Jordan River Valley and all. And it was going to be a fabulous place. And so it's just this steel skeleton, and it was stopped by the 67 war, and Jordan moved out never to return in that whole territory. So all that to say, you've got Palestinians in the West Bank and Palestinians down in Gaza. One group was Jordanian, the other was Egyptian. Now they're nothing. And you hear politicians talking about a two-state solution, like, let's go ahead and acknowledge this is another country. And that makes nobody happy. You know, it's probably what needs to happen somehow, but Palestinians don't want that. And Israelis, who have been through all these wars down through the years, all the way back to the Holocaust, they don't feel comfortable with that, but they're trying to build a wall around it and try to make that work somehow. But the Jordanians don't want the Palestinians in the West Bank to cross the Jordan River headed east and settle in Jordan. They don't want them. I mean, they were once Jordanian. They don't want them because it's like this will be something we can't take on. It's like we see our southern border and millions crossing the border. It's like, who's going to take care of these people? Where are they going to go? What are they going to do? Where are they going to live? So the Jordanians are saying to the West Bank people, we're all for you, but don't come here. And the Egyptians had built a wall at Gaza, on the south side of Gaza. Israel's built the eastern wall and the northern wall, and the Mediterranean's on the west, and Egyptians have their wall on the south side, and they're saying, we're all for you, Palestinians, but you're not coming back into Egypt. We don't want you. We don't have a place for you. We can't afford you. We don't know what to do with you. So we're with you, but don't come here. So you have two groups of Palestinians that are trapped with no place to go, and it's not good. I mean, there's not a good obvious solution. And it's kind of hard, as a Christian, as an American Christian who's not Israelite or Palestinian, it's kind of hard to know, where do we come down on this? What are we about? How should we feel about all this? And I've met people like Mr. Nissan in Bethlehem and know that they're really good, godly Christian folks in those territories. And they're isolated over there. And how do we feel about that? What should we do? How should we encourage Israel to respond to that? So that's part of the challenge. And then 6 weeks ago, we had this incident, 6 or 7 weeks ago, I've lost track of time, and the depravity and the evil of what happened when they that strip of Gaza is surrounded by Israelite communities. Some of them are old Philistine cities from the Old Testament that are modern day cities today, Ashkelon and that kind of things there. And a lot of Old Testament, Beersheba is where Abraham spent a lot of his life. That's not that far from there.
Yeah.
So they've tried to sort of settle around Gaza, is to say, don't get any ideas about Gaza's going to expand and take more territory. We've got our cities here now.
Yes.
So they're surrounded and no place to go, and not any real vision of how to develop Gaza in anything sustainable or productive or prosperous.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of high-rise buildings that it's kind of impressive at a 5-mile look, and then you get the up-close shots, and they're really pretty shoddy buildings and constructions, and it's a second or third world country with no hope. And so all that conflict's breaking out there.
Yeah.
So there's no easy solution. We'll see what they come up with in the coming days.
Yeah, it is tough. And as Christians, we pray for God's will, and we support or stand with Israel. But, again, you say they're Christian people there. And many people are, I think, a little confused on who is in Gaza, the government of Gaza, and then, how the West Bank is ruled.
From humble beginnings with a desire to serve the Dudley community, Bank of Dudley has grown to 5 locations, serving Lawrence, Twiggs, and surrounding counties. Serving our community since 1905, the Bank of Dudley is looking forward to its 2nd century of community banking. Drop in today to any of our 5 locations: Jeffersonville, Dudley, East Dublin, Veterans Boulevard, and downtown Dublin. Bank of Dudley, member FDIC, and an equal housing lender.
We have natural gas all over town.
Get yourself a natural gas tankless water heater and save space.
And have endless hot water.
Natural gas is more efficient than electricity.
And it's lighter than air. When you install natural gas appliances,
You can get rebates up to $1,500.
The City of Dublin will finance you up to $7,500.
For 60 months at 0% interest.
Use natural gas for all your outdoor cooking.
it's a luxury.
We're on call 24/7.
You'll call us and we'll be there.
Whether you're building a home or starting a business, City of Dublin Natural Gas has you covered.
We serve commercial and residential gas all across town.
Yeah. Finish the drill with natural gas. Call your gas guys.
At 478-277-5048.
If we could, when we look at that area and we compare where Israel is today and where they were in biblical times, and if we could, people are, I think, confused about or have questions about how Israel was reestablished, how Jewish people got their country back, so to speak, from the British or during that era in 47, May 14th of 1947 is when, and they were immediately attacked by, countries all around them at that time. And then I guess the next war would have been 67.
There was one in the 50s, and then 67 was the big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, our last trip, we were riding, all trips, not all, but most trips, you start off going to the north and you see Galilee and the land of Jesus up there, and then you gravitate down to the Dead Sea, and then you go to Jerusalem. We were on that trip headed south, down near the Jordan River, headed south to the southern region and the Dead Sea. And I was sitting at the front of the bus, and Itai, I mentioned earlier, our guide, was up there, and the bus driver. And so I started talking to these two Israeli guys. And I said, because I get out a map like that, and I'm trying to envision the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and they're not attached. How could you link them together and create a country and try to settle out and have peace and stabilize this thing? So I asked them, well, what about the leadership in the West Bank and the leadership in Gaza? I mean, can they pull this together and create a country? And they just sit there, no, they're not on the same page. They don't get along at all. Well, I don't know, and I don't know how much they knew, but they seem to be pretty confident in their answer that no, they're two different groups of people. They would never be able to pull off a government that governed both of those as one country. So that's interesting and troubling. It's one more troubling part of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you unravel that. So the Palestinians, if you go back, I've got some old books from like the 1800s that some of the artists that went through and the photographers, early photographers that went through and filmed some of these locations that today might be very modern cities. 150 years ago, there was almost nothing there. Nazareth, when Jesus was growing up in Nazareth, was just a small little community.
Yeah.
Sepphoris was about 4 miles north of that, and that was a Roman colony, and it was a booming city. But Nazareth, almost nothing. This was David Roberts, the Scottish artist that painted everything. He had a picture of Nazareth I've got hanging up in one of my rooms, and there's just almost nothing there. This is not 2,000 years ago. This is 150 years ago. Now it's a sizable city, an Arab, a lot of Christians. Most Christians in Israel live in Nazareth, and they're Arabs, not Jews. So that's interesting. But all of that to say, a lot of what you see today was not there a long time ago. So when Palestinians are talking about their deep roots there and all that, well, yeah, maybe kinda, but it's not like Israel came in and a great booming economy was taken over and pirated away from them. They really didn't have a whole lot going on. And coming out of World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust and what was happening, the whole world community was saying, we've got to do something where there's a Jewish world where they'll have a safe. And they created that odd map. The original Israel of 1947-48 is a strange little thing that wraps around that West Bank, and it's got a little sliver that went over to Jerusalem so that they could touch base with Jerusalem, the western side of Jerusalem. But it's an odd thing configured way back in the 1940s to try to settle all this and bring some kind of peace. The British, when they got out of, they had the mandate and ruled over that area for a while, which is looked back on as a terrible thing. That was a blessing.
Yeah.
I go to Zambia often. I'm real involved with missions in Zambia.
Yes.
And on their money, they've got the guy that's got shackles, and he's breaking the shackles, and they're breaking free into independence in the 1960s. And the real truth is the British were saying, look, we really are excited about you being independent. Yeah. You know, we don't have anything else to do there, and we need to kind of begin to get out, and you need to stand up and be a country. And I think the same thing was going on in the Middle East in the 1940s and coming out of World War II and the exhausted resources, the British Empire. And they're saying, look, you know, you need a place, and we'll create this Israel. And it all was patched together and as best they could, I guess. But it had some inevitable flaws to it because these two people don't see themselves as compatible. And you hear the chants on TV now, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, or different versions of that. And river to the sea is the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, and they're talking about all of that.
Yeah.
So they're not talking about we're going to get freedom for the West Bank and become a second country. They're saying, no, it's all of ours. Back to the guy on Temple Mount the last time we were there saying, no, there was never a temple here. And so the Palestinians and a lot of Americans thinking they're standing up for justice or whatever are getting sucked into some bad history. And they're really saying there was never an Israel here. There is no Israeli history. There is no Israeli claim to that. So we want it all. We don't want to divvy it up. We want it all. And so that's the challenge. Yeah. And there's nobody that can solve that other than God. And it's a God thing.
Yeah.
So, of course, I'm Christian, Baptist, Southern Baptist version of Christian. So I said, well, what is our role? What's our response? And I think our response is Jesus, Jesus Christ. He is the centerpiece of the promised plan of God, and He's the only hope. Israel is an amazing country. It's amazingly developed in some ways, technologically. Their work in the world of diamonds and the diamond industry, I mean, they're pretty amazing people. You go up in the Jezreel Valley, and the farms are just lush farms, and you go in the markets and see what they've grown, and it's not just pretty good, it's awesome stuff that they've harvested and got in the marketplaces. They're strong, but at the same time, from a Christian perspective, it's a very spiritually lost country. Most of them are not even practicing Jews in the Jewish faith. You see the guys at the Wailing Wall and all that, and it's real obvious and amazing to watch. But most of them are just busy being a modern country, sort of a libertarian modern country that's not too much interested in the New Testament or the Old Testament.
Yeah.
They like for American tourists to come. They love Christian tourists to come and spend their money.
Yes.
But for themselves, it's kind of like, we don't really need that. It's fun, it's interesting, and we want you to come and feel at home here and consider this the 51st state, but we're not into that part.
Yeah.
Our first trip, we had an Israeli Christian guide, and she was probably about 60 years old. She lives the first 30 years in New York City and the Jewish culture of New York, and then her last 30 years in Israel. And our group started wanting to take up money, and they loved the bus driver, and they wanted to buy him a Bible, give him a really nice Bible, just as an encouragement and a thank you, and as Christian witness to him. And she was a Jewish Christian, Messianic Jew, and she said to the people that were trying to do that, you don't need to do that, he's okay. And which meant, in her theology, he was okay because he was Jewish. He had Jewish blood. And in her theology, that's all you needed.
Right.
So it's like, whoa, that was enlightening. I think her faith in Christ was sincere, but her theology was like, basically all of Israel will be saved.
Yes.
Which Paul says in Scripture, but it's misunderstood. But that's kind of where they were coming from. So most Jews think we're kind of chosen people, but we're not worrying about that too much today. God will take care of that. We're just going to have a good life and build a modern culture. So I go there and I see Mr. Nissan and the Palestinians, and I say, with the exception of the small Christian minority, this is a lost culture. These are people. These are Arab, mostly Arabish people of a version of Muslim background who need Jesus. And I go on the other side of the world, the other side of the fence or the wall, and say, this is a very modern first world country that looks a lot more like the United States, and we're very safe and welcome here. And but it's a culture that needs Jesus. So, from a missionary heart, I see two lost groups of people, and the only thing that could ever bring them together would be that common bond of faith.
Amen.
Hi, I'm Tom Dominy. Here at Dublin Wind Nelson, we pride ourselves on providing the industry's highest quality products at the most competitive pricing. We are a full-service wholesaler specializing in plumbing, irrigation, and industrial products. With a staff that collectively offers more than 50 years of expertise, our team knows your industry, and we can answer your questions and help you get the parts and equipment you need. From mowing to Renee, we carry the plumbing, irrigation, and industrial products you need from the brands you trust. We also carry a great lineup of Milwaukee tools. At Dublin Wind Nelson, our goal is the long-term success of your business. We achieve that goal with a simple commitment, doing things right, one customer at a time. If you have a question or if you're looking for a hard-to-find part, give us a call. Our experts are ready to help. Order online, give us a call, or come by at 507 Airport Road in Dublin. We're committed to building long-term relationships with our customers by earning your business every day.
Train for a new career or go further in a field you love with education and skills training from Oconee Fall Line Technical College. OFTC offers 130-plus programs in high-demand fields that will prepare you for the workforce fast. That's 2 years or less. Classes are hands-on, giving students practical experience to be successful on the job. With affordable tuition and flexible classes, you can fit college into your lifestyle. Isn't it time you loved your career? Get started with OFTC today. Oconee Fall Line Technical College. Careers begin here.
If we look back into Genesis and we look, where do these people come from? What are these two different people? Because it's Jewish, there's Arab, there's now
Right.
Palestine. I guess it's just the two, and it's Ishmael and Isaiah.
Isaac.
Yeah.
Well, Genesis spends 11 chapters in a very broad scale, coming down through Noah and the flood and the restart and the Tower of Babel and the scattering of the nations and all. But that's the first 11 chapters. And then in chapter 12, Abraham comes on the scene. And I've heard people say, well, everything up before chapter 12 is just prelude or build up to the real story of Abraham. That's not really true. It starts with Adam, and there's a family link from Adam down to Abraham. But you have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, 4 generations in Jacob's sons. And then you even have 2 sons of Joseph, so technically you have 5 generations, but it's really 4 generations that all the rest of the book of Genesis is built around. Yeah. And out of the wild, crazy, zany story of Genesis, which I take is historically totally accurate. It's a great, great record of those years. Abraham has Ishmael, which was not a part of God's plan A, and then Isaac, who was the son of promise. And so that's where the first divide into these people that would all call themselves Abrahamic, but they're going to go down different roads. And Jacob and Esau are born to Isaac. And there's a problem. They're twin brothers. They're the same blood, but they're going to separate and go different ways through the Genesis story. And the younger will serve the older will serve the younger, the scripture says. Meaning Esau, who was born a few minutes before his brother, Esau, his descendants become the Edomites, which later in the Bible, they're on the other side of the Dead Sea, like south of the Dead Sea and southeast of the Dead Sea. That's the area of Edom. And by New Testament times, Edom, Edom has become Idumea, E-D-U-M-A-M-A, Idumea. I'm not spelling that right. Anyhow, Herod the Great is an Idumean. He's got some Jewish connection, but he's basically an Edomite. And so here you've got this New Testament story that runs all the way back up into that Genesis story of the younger and the older and the 2 groups and the descendants of Jacob. And Jesus comes in that line, and you got descendants of Edom, and they become the Idumeans, and Herod the Great comes out of that world, and he's out to kill the babies of Bethlehem, and that part of the Christmas story. So it's got deep, deep roots. It goes way, way back.
Yeah.
So in the West Bank, one of my disappointments, first time I went, and I had written down for the guide everything I wanted to see, and I was going to set the itinerary. And I've always loved the book of Joshua, so I had all these sites, and most of them were not able to visit because they're in the West Bank, and it's not considered safe for tour buses for most people. Some say, well, it's no big deal, and they'll go. Those guides didn't want to go in that area. They wanted you to spend your money in the right places, for one thing, but they also were worried about their bus and getting down in a place where rocks were going to get thrown at it, or people might even get hurt. Yeah. So they avoided all that. But if you went in the West Bank, if you're looking at this map, I don't know how well you can see it on the camera. You see the dark green, and it's dark green to indicate forest and growth, but it's also to indicate the high ground. This is a 3D map I got in Israel. But if you can envision, basically that green area is the West Bank. It's sort of shaped like a kidney bean, but it's basically that area. And if you go up into that, you're in biblical Samaria. And in the story of Joshua, Joshua conquered Jericho in the low country, then went up and took Ai, and then he turned north and started to conquer the region in the north. And he came to Shechem when Jacob came back from a distant land with his wives and his kids and his goats and his sheep and all the stuff. That's where he was trying to get back to, crossing the Jordan River and going into that. All that's in the West Bank. In the New Testament time, it's in Samaria. And Joshua took them, and they had a worship service designed by Moses before he died. He said, when you get there, this is what you're going to do. There are two mountains, one on the north, Mount Ebal, and one on the south, Mount Gerizim, and together they create a bowl or sort of an arena. And Shechem is down there. Sychar is really the same area, a little apart. And Jacob's well is there. Jacob's well from the book of Genesis has always been there since way back. And they take it to be the same well. So at that well, in John chapter 4, Jesus has gone up there on purpose into Samaritan territory, because everything's a faith experience and a lesson for the disciples. And he's taken them into Samaria, an uncomfortable world for them. And he sent them into the city to buy food. And he's out there by this well. Now it's covered over by a church building. And then it was just like an open well, and where you see the women coming with their jars to get their water every day. And here comes this woman, and ends up there are only two people there. It's a divine appointment. And Jesus starts to talk to her. And he says, you know, woman, you've had 5 husbands, and you're not married to the guy you're living with now. It's like, oh, wow. How'd you know that? You must be, I discern that you're a prophet. Well, he is a prophet, but he's a whole lot more. But she eventually runs into the city and tells everybody, and people come out, and a lot of people turn to Christ at that point. But at the well, if you turn to the west, you'd look up and you'd see Mount Gerizim on the south and Ebal, and Joshua took the people in his day and had them on both of those mountains. And from Ebal, they would read the curses. These are the bad things that will happen if you don't follow the God of the Bible. And from Gerizim, they would shout the blessings. This is what happens if you do the Lord's will, if you live out God's word, if you try to honor Him in all things. These are the blessings that will come to you as a people. And so they kind of did this back and forth reading of scriptures that relate to that. And I would love to have a time machine ticket to go and witness that, you know, and how did they do that? But Moses set that up, and then Joshua carried it out when they got up there in the conquest of the northern area. So here's that well at the bottom, and you go from Joshua 1,300 years or so down to Jesus' day, and he's at that well. In the meantime, the north and south have been split into Israel and Judah, and Israel's been scattered and mixed, and they've become Samaritans. And so the Jews in the south and in Galilee are not comfortable with these people in the middle in Samaria. They're racially different, they're culturally different, they're racially half and half, they're spiritually half and half. So they got a little Old Testament, but they have put a temple up on Mount Gerizim, the southern mountain. And they've done that so that their people wouldn't try to go down to Jerusalem to worship. It's like, no, we've got our own. You don't need to do that. And we'll worship here. It'll be the same thing. And that's so the woman at the well asked Jesus, since you're a prophet, tell me, my people say we should worship here, and your people say you can only worship in Jerusalem. So what's right? She's pretty teachable at that point. And Jesus' answer is really important. It's, when you get into discussions about end times and Israel and all that, Jesus says, no, I tell you, and I'm really paraphrasing, but he says the day's going to come when you worship not at this mountain, and I think he pointed to Mount Gerizim when he said that. Not at this mountain or at Jerusalem. But those that worship will worship in spirit and in truth, which means it's going to go internal. It's going to be a thing of the heart and not geography. So you go back to the original question, Jerusalem. What does Jerusalem matter? Well, the territory doesn't mean so much. The symbol is powerful, but the Jerusalem we need to have in our heads and hearts that we're excited about needs to be the Jerusalem of Christ. He's the Lord of that city. He was all along, and he is today. It's his turf, and he's coming back to it. Now back to that Temple Mount. Jesus was up there with the disciples, and it's Holy Week. It's the week before the crucifixion. And the temple that Herod rebuilt, you had Solomon's temple that was torn down by Babylonians, replaced by Zerubbabel's temple and Ezra and Nehemiah in those days. And it was not nearly as impressive. So down just before the New Testament age, Herod starts to rebuild the temple into something awesome. And so it was probably the outstanding building in the world in its day. It was probably absolutely beautiful, amazing stonework. The stones that are in the western wall that he worked and elevated and flattened that mountain out are amazing. What he did with the temple itself, I can't imagine. But the disciples say to Jesus, like Jesus has never noticed it. He said, look at the architecture. Well, Jesus, he was dedicated in that temple, on the 8th day. At age 12, he was in that temple or somewhere on Temple Mount with the scholars giving him answers that they were blown away. How's this 12-year-old know this stuff? So he knows all about the temple. And the theology of the temple is ultimately about his cross that's coming in a few days. So they're not telling Jesus anything. So they point that out. And again, just roughly paraphrasing, Jesus says, don't worry too much about this building. The day's going to come when there won't be one stone upon another. It's all coming down. Well, you probably saw when you went on the southwestern corner of Temple Mount, there's a pile of rock where Roman soldiers pushed temple rocks over the ledge and it fell down, they broke up, and a lot of that's still there today. I mean, there's no way it's not that. So they left Temple Mount that day and went across the Kidron Valley to the east and up on the Mount of Olives. And looking back, and the disciples were like, Jesus, tell us what you meant. What are you talking about? If I took you to Westminster Abbey in London and you'd never seen it before, you'd say, that's incredible. What an amazing building. How did they ever build that? And all the history and the people buried in this is incredible. And I said to you, don't worry about it. It's going to be gone in a few years. You'd say, what in the world are you talking about? There's no way. This is downtown London. This is not going to go away. Well, that's kind of what he tells them. And so they want to know, when does that happen? And when is the time of your kingdom? When's that going to happen? So Matthew 24 and 25 are his response to that. And in the middle of that message, he gets down to about the 14th verse of chapter 24. And I won't take the time to read it, but he says, this is what you need to mostly know. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached to every nation for a witness, and then the end will come. That's when, if you want to know when it's going to come. When's the end? It's not when something happens in Gaza. The end comes when the church finishes the Great Commission. And he says, when that happens, it'll all be over. And that's Jesus' response to the temple issue. It's like, don't get caught up in the building or the place. This is about this message the message of Jerusalem, the message of the gospel, and the promised plan of God going to every nook and cranny in the world. And then it will happen. Then the end will come. All that's very properly understood. It's very mission driven. It's about the Great Commission. And taking the only real hope, the only enduring hope is Christ. Because those two people groups over there, the Israeli army is pretty amazing. It's an awesome, humanly speaking, it's an awesome small army. And the technology they use and how they go about things, and you can see it on TV, they're taking out precision takeouts of building by building, and they really know what they're doing, highly trained. But they can't pull off what they really want, which is final true peace. That will come when Jesus comes and gets that straight. So that's the long and the short of what we need to know about Gaza. In the meantime, just so much tragedy and the depth of the evil, the wickedness of the guys that did that on that morning at the music festival, you know, and just unimaginable how you can think that and celebrate that and film it and brag about it. And that's at a lower level of depravity than any of these wars we've seen in the last 70 years over there. You know, it's gone to a new depth. So it's going to be really hard to unravel just to get to a time of some stability. Thomas Jefferson, talking about slavery, talked about America having a wolf by the ears. It's like, well, you got him, you know, got 2 ears, and he can't get you, but you also can't let go. And so Israel is prevailing militarily in Gaza. They're going to just keep going block by block until they achieve their goal. But at some point, they're going to have the wolf by the ears. And how do you say, okay, now let's all go back to Tel Aviv and Gaza can get on with it? You know, how will you get there? In 10 years, 20 years, it's an incredible mess. And so we need a second coming. But the real answer is, in the meantime, Christians just need to be ambassadors for Christ and pray for all those people. I can't imagine what it's like to be a dad in Gaza trying to raise your kids in that environment with Hamas ruling as the government and trying to figure out, what do we do? What's the real answer here? What do I do for my children?
Do in your humble opinion, do you think that Israel, United States can do away with that evil presence there?
To some degree. But it's kind of like, I grew up across from a park, up in College Park, and somebody got the great idea of covering the bank because there was a big drop-off in a road on one side of the park, so they covered it in kudzu. And the kudzu, everybody's seen kudzu, it gets out of control. And so the city spent a lot of time and effort trying to control that kudzu so it didn't take over College Park. And so they would come in occasionally and just burn it all off. They cut everything they could, and then they just burn it down to the roots, everything they could. And by the next year, it was back. You know, it's the roots are there, and the evil behind that attack several weeks ago is still there. Only Christ can change that from the inside out. So pray for the Mr. Nissans. You know, the Christians, the very, very, very small number of Christians in Gaza. They're more up in the West Bank part of Palestine. But pray for those folks. And there are missionaries. I've got some stories I probably shouldn't tell on a program, but of Christian workers in those areas and what they deal with and how they're surviving and getting by as a Christian witness in those places of darkness. And so I don't know.
What about them? What about them for them? Spiritually, every day, physically to overcome things. But.
It's a turf war, and there's a spiritual turf war in Georgia today. I mean, I love Georgia. I've lived here almost all my whole life and love the people and the culture and all, but there's good and evil here, light and dark here. And it's like, what's going to prevail? You know, what's going to be most influential in Dublin, Georgia in the next 10 years? and are the folks in the good churches going to be ambassadors for Christ and the salt and light of this community? Or will darker things prevail, and what's going on there? So we're not having to chase Hamas in tunnels, but we're in a world where the dark side would love our children, or love to see our children walk away from the faith.
Yes.
So that's kind of...
And there's only one way to overcome that. There's only one way to prevail.
Right.
Yeah, through the Word and through prayer.
Right.
As good Christians, and that's what we're all called to do.
Yeah. Thomas in the upper room saying, how do we know the way? And Jesus said, and it's very strong in the Greek, the way it's written in the Greek New Testament, because you can have just the word am, and it implies I am. Or you can put another Greek word, the pronoun for I, ego eimi, which is I am, and that strengthens it. Well, Jesus was probably not speaking Greek, but the New Testament is trying to reflect what he meant. And so it's really like Jesus saying, I am the way. So Thomas wants to know, what's the way? Show us the way. Yeah. Get us on the right trail, Jesus. And Jesus says, I am the trail. I am the way. And nobody comes to the Father but by me. So that's the hope of the nations. It's the hope of Gaza. It's the hope of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem means nothing, but it kind of means everything. It's
beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yeah.
I know
pleasure.
everyone enjoyed it. Anytime you come down, it's just a wealth of information. But you're driven by the true desire to follow Christ, and as we study, as we read, the more time we have on this earth, the more is revealed to us, and the stronger Christian, the stronger leader for Christ we can be, or follower. And
those people groups will be reached somewhat by creative, energetic mission endeavors, mostly by prayer. My daughter-in-law was a Baptist missionary in Egypt and in Palestine, in Jordan, and in Jerusalem. She was moved around and lived a little bit in each of those areas. And her husband, our second son, Andrew, was a missionary in Egypt, and I went to visit him. And you got off the plane, and Cairo is such a massive city. There are 80 million Egyptians, and most of them live in Cairo or something that touches Cairo, and just rows and rows and rows and rows of buildings, high-rise buildings, and 90% Muslim. And you think, and I didn't want to say it to him because he's there as a Christian missionary, but this is not doable. You're not going to do this. I mean, you're going to try, but only God can do this thing. And so we pray and we do our part and we work and see what the Lord has in mind. And it's amazing that's another story for another day, what's going on in some of those places. But there are people coming to Christ even in those places, even in those settings. So there's always hope till Jesus comes.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.